It's 10:30 p.m. March 22nd, 1945. You're sitting in a wooden assault boat on the western bank of the Rhine River. There's no artillery covering you, no bombers overhead, no smokescreen hiding your approach. Just you, 11 other men, and 300 yards of black, freezing water between you and Nazi Germany. 200 miles north, 1 million Allied soldiers are still waiting, still preparing, for the same crossing you're about to attempt right now. With nothing. The man next to you grips his paddle so hard his knuckles have gone white. Nobody speaks. The only sound is the river current slapping against the hull. Somewhere on the far bank, German machine gun nests sit on the high ground, their fields of fire covering every inch of this crossing point. If they spot you, if one sentry hears one paddle splash too loud, every gun on that bank opens up, and this boat becomes your coffin. The man who sent you across this river without a single artillery shell for cover is standing on the bank behind you, General George S. Patton, and right now he's betting your life on one thing, that the Germans will never expect anyone crazy enough to cross the Rhine like this. No bombardment, no air support, just speed, silence, and the kind of audacity that either wins wars or fills graveyards. To understand why you're in this boat tonight, and why 1 million men up north are still sitting on dry ground, you need to understand a rivalry that had been boiling since North Africa. A rivalry between two generals who agreed on absolutely nothing, except that the other one was dangerously wrong. And what happened over the next 12 hours would humiliate one of them so completely that even Winston Churchill couldn't contain his reaction. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Monty to his troops, was the most celebrated British general of the war. His victory at El Alamein in 1942 had made him a national hero, and his approach to warfare was built on one unshakable principle: never attack until you have overwhelming superiority in every single category. More guns, more men, more ammunition, more of everything. Montgomery didn't believe in fair fights. He believed in crushing his enemy under the sheer weight of preparation. For him, war was mathematics. Calculate every risk, eliminate every variable, then strike with such force that victory becomes inevitable. George Patton believed in the exact opposite: speed, surprise, violence of action. His Third Army had torn across France faster than any army in history, his tank columns regularly outrunning their own supply lines, his men surviving on captured German fuel when their own ran dry. Patton had one rule that defined everything he did: a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. By March 1945, both generals faced the same obstacle: the Rhine, Germany's last great natural fortress, nearly a quarter-mile wide in places. Fast-moving, ice-cold, and lined with fortifications on the eastern bank. Hitler had personally ordered every bridge destroyed, every crossing point fortified, every meter of the far shore turned into a killing zone. Whoever crossed the Rhine first would crack open the door to Germany's industrial heartland and bring the war to its end. And both men wanted that glory. Montgomery was given the primary mission, a massive set piece crossing near Wesel in the north, codenamed Operation Plunder, the largest river crossing operation in military history. Patton was told to wait, to play a supporting role, to let Montgomery have his moment. Patton had absolutely no intention of waiting. Operation Plunder was a spectacle of military logistics Unlike anything the world had ever seen, Montgomery assembled 1 million soldiers from the British Second Army and the American Ninth Army, 4,000 artillery pieces, 30,000 airborne troops, 3,000 heavy bombers. He wanted this crossing to make D-Day look modest by comparison, and he wanted it absolutely perfect. Every artillery piece was surveyed into position with mathematical precision. Every assault boat was tested and retested. Infantry units rehearsed the crossing on smaller rivers behind the lines again and again until every man could do it in total darkness. Montgomery set his launch date, March 24th, not a day sooner. Not until every shell was counted, every risk eliminated, and every variable brought under his complete control. But there was one problem that no amount of planning could fix. You cannot hide 1 million men. German reconnaissance planes flew over Montgomery's build-up every single day, photographing everything. The enemy knew exactly where he planned to cross. They knew approximately when, and they were pouring reinforcements into those exact positions with every soldier they could pull from other sectors. Montgomery had traded away the one advantage that costs nothing and is worth everything in war: surprise. In London, Winston Churchill was losing patience. Every day Montgomery spent preparing was another day the war consumed lives and treasure. Another day the Soviets pushed deeper into Eastern Europe, claiming territory that would shape the post-war world for generations. Churchill needed someone to cross that river, and he needed it yesterday. 200 miles south of Montgomery's colossal army, George Patton was hunched over a map in his field headquarters. His finger rested on a small German town that most staff officers had never heard of: Oppenheim, sitting on the Rhine's eastern bank between Mainz and Worms. Strategically insignificant, according to everyone who wasn't George Patton. What Patton saw, no one else was looking for. The Germans had stripped their southern Rhine defenses bare, redeploying everything northward to counter Montgomery's impossible-to-miss build-up. Oppenheim was held by a skeleton garrison, under-strength units, second-rate troops, minimal artillery coverage. The door was wide open. But it wouldn't stay open for long. Patton summoned his commanders from the 5th Infantry Division and laid out a plan that bordered on insanity. They would cross the Rhine at Oppenheim, at night, without preliminary bombardment, without air support, without a smokescreen, without any of the preparations that every military textbook in existence said were absolutely essential for a contested river assault. One officer reportedly asked if he was serious. Patton's answer was pure Patton. The Germans would never expect an attack this reckless. And that was exactly why it would work. Speed and surprise would replace firepower. Darkness would replace smokescreen. And audacity, pure calculated audacity, would replace the 1 million men they didn't have. 48 hours later, those officers would either be heroes or casualties. There was no middle ground. On the evening of March 22, 1945, 6 battalions of the 11th Infantry Regiment moved toward the Rhine in total silence. They carried wooden assault boats on their shoulders, boats that offered zero protection against machine gun fire. Each man carried his rifle, ammunition, and grenades. Nothing else, no heavy weapons, no armor support, just infantry, against whatever was waiting on the other side of that black water. At 10:30 p.m., the first boats touched water. The Rhine at Oppenheim stretched 300 yards across. 3 football fields of open, freezing water with absolutely no cover. The current ran hard enough to push a loaded boat downstream if the men stopped paddling for even a second. And on the far bank, German positions sat on elevated ground, with clear lines of fire straight down to the waterline. The crossing took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of absolute silence, broken only by the sound of wooden paddles cutting black water and the pounding of 12 hearts beating too fast. 7 minutes where a single cough, a single splash, a single metallic clang of a rifle hitting the gunwale could trigger a wall of machine gun fire across the water. 7 minutes that would change the course of the war. The first boats scraped onto the eastern bank. Soldiers poured out into ankle-deep water and immediately hit the ground. They waited, listening, scanning the darkness. Nothing. No shouts, no gunfire, no flares. The German sentries hadn't detected them. Patton's impossible gamble was paying off. What followed was swift and brutal. Patton's infantry stormed the German positions with bayonets and hand grenades, maintaining silence even during the assault to keep from alerting positions further down the bank. German soldiers stumbled out of bunkers half-dressed, completely disoriented by an attack they never imagined possible. Many surrendered on the spot without firing a single shot. Some never woke up at all. Within 2 hours, the Americans had carved out a substantial bridgehead on the eastern bank. Within 6 hours, combat engineers were constructing a pontoon bridge across the Rhine, working through the darkness with the kind of desperate speed that only comes when you know the enemy's counterattack is a matter of hours, not days. By dawn, on March 23rd, Patton's tanks were rolling across the Rhine into Germany. 12 hours. From first boat to armor crossing. No million-man army. No 4,000 artillery guns. No 3-month preparation. 12 hours. And fewer than 40 total casualties. And then George Patton did something that would become one of the most legendary moments of the entire Second World War. He walked out to the center of the pontoon bridge, stopped, and looked down at the Rhine, the river that Hitler had sworn would never be crossed. The river that Montgomery had declared required 1 million men and 3 months to breach. Patton unzipped his fly and urinated directly into the Rhine River. Then he turned to his gathered staff officers and announced, with undisguised satisfaction, that he had been waiting to do that for a very, very long time. But the real shockwave hadn't landed yet. That was about to hit 200 miles north in Montgomery's headquarters and in Winston Churchill's war room. Patton grabbed a field telephone and called General Omar Bradley at 12th Army Group headquarters. His words became the stuff of legend. "Brad, don't tell anyone, but I'm across." A pause on the line, then, "I sneaked a division over last night." But Patton being Patton, secrecy lasted about 5 minutes. He wanted the world to know. He wanted Montgomery to know. And he wanted them to know before Operation Plunder launched its first shell. The message reached London that morning. Churchill read it once, then again, more slowly. Then, according to those present, he let out a laugh. Not joyful laughter, a sharp, bitter bark, the sound of a man realizing that everything he'd spent months waiting for had just been made unnecessary by one reckless American general with a handful of boats and zero permission. Churchill stared at the map. In the north, Montgomery's 1 million men. 4,000 guns, 3,000 bombers. All still sitting there, still preparing, still counting shells. In the south, a single pin at Oppenheim, where Patton had already done it. The contrast was devastating, and Churchill knew exactly what it meant. For Montgomery, for British military prestige, and for the future of the war. When Montgomery received word, the humiliation was absolute. For months he had insisted, publicly, repeatedly and loudly, that crossing the Rhine without massive preparation was suicide, that only a fool would attempt it without overwhelming superiority. Patton had just proven him catastrophically wrong. With 6 battalions, in 12 hours, with fewer casualties than a single one of Montgomery's rehearsal exercises. Montgomery still had his grand moment ahead, but what happened next proved something brutal, that being second can be worse than never trying at all. On the night of March 23rd, exactly 24 hours after Patton's silent crossing, Montgomery finally launched Operation Plunder, and it was everything he had promised. 4,000 guns opened fire in perfect synchronization, the largest concentrated artillery barrage since the invasion of Normandy. The eastern bank of the Rhine disappeared under a tidal wave of high explosive. 3,000 bombers blacked out the sky. 30,000 paratroopers dropped behind German lines in the largest single-day airborne operation in history. Wave after wave of infantry crossed in assault boats under devastating covering fire. It was magnificent. It was overwhelming. It was everything Montgomery had spent months engineering to perfection. And it was completely unnecessary, because Patton had already proven that the Rhine could be crossed without any of it. Montgomery's assault succeeded, but against far stiffer resistance than Patton ever encountered. The Germans had known exactly where and when Plunder was coming. They had reinforced, they had dug in, they were ready, and the price was paid in thousands of casualties, a cost that dwarfed Patton's 40. The newspapers delivered the verdict Montgomery feared most. Patton's crossing dominated every headline. The silent night assault, the audacity, the moment on the bridge. It was exactly the kind of story the press couldn't resist, and exactly the kind of story that reduced Montgomery's carefully orchestrated masterpiece to a historical footnote. Churchill's private words cut deeper than any headline. He dictated a message to Montgomery dripping with sarcasm, noting that events on the ground had moved considerably faster than Montgomery's preparations. To his chiefs of staff, he went further. He openly questioned whether Britain's methodical approach to warfare was still suited for modern mobile combat. Coming from Churchill, the man who had defended Montgomery through every criticism for 3 years, those words detonated like a bomb. The strategic aftermath settled the debate beyond any argument. Patton's Third Army detonated out of the Oppenheim bridgehead and raced across Germany at a speed that made maps obsolete before the ink was dry. Towns, cities, and entire German formations were overrun before they could mount any organized resistance. The southern German front didn't just bend, it disintegrated. Eisenhower drew the only conclusion the evidence allowed. After the Rhine, he gave the war-winning missions to commanders who shared Patton's instinct: speed, initiative, aggression. Montgomery was quietly sidelined to secondary objectives, while American forces drove straight for the heart of Germany. The Rhine crossing taught a lesson that reaches far beyond March 1945. Montgomery treated war like chess, patient, precise, every piece in perfect position before committing to a single move. Patton treated it like a street fight: hit first, hit fast, and never stop moving. Both philosophies had proven their worth. El Alamein showed Montgomery could win major battles his way. But the Rhine revealed something more fundamental, that waiting for perfect conditions often creates the very resistance you're preparing to overcome, that the enemy strengthens while you hesitate, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing a commander can do is nothing. Patton said it best himself. We crossed the Rhine because we never stopped to ask whether it was possible. We just went ahead and did it, while others were still debating feasibility. George Patton crossed the Rhine in silence, and the echo of that silence has never stopped reverberating through military history. History remembers the bold and forgets the ones who waited too long. If this story gripped you, if you want more untold moments where courage and audacity decided the fate of nations, hit subscribe and turn on notifications for Last Stand history. We cover the battles, the last stands, and the turning points that the textbooks leave out. Now I want to hear from you. Was Patton brilliant or reckless? Would you have climbed into that boat with no artillery, no air cover, and nothing but darkness between you and the German guns? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me, what last stand should we cover next?